We are now ready to begin our webinar. So hello everyone, my name is Mihaela Ștefan. I am a professional services engineer at Infinet Wireless. Thank you very much for taking the time to join our webinar. Today we are going to discuss about the equipment reliability and faultiness and how are those ensured using the Infinet Wireless devices. The device's reliability and its resistance to various external influences are ensured by a set of measures implemented both in the hardware design and in the quality control procedures for all the production stages. Our webinar agenda includes the following topics: the climate impacts, referring to very diverse external factors such as exposure to sunlight, humidity, pressure, or something non-trivial like insects, for example. Next, we will cover some aspects related to the physical impacts, like the resistance to vibrations or to direct mechanical strikes. The third main subject concerns the electromagnetic influences causing interference. And our last topic of discussion will be related to the grounding recommendations in order to ensure a stable and proper operation of the devices in case of lightning strikes or accumulated energy. Let's begin with the climatic impacts, more precisely with the dust and water protection. For this purpose, the ingress protection rating or IP rating denotes the effectiveness of the sealing of the equipment's enclosure. This is very important because it protects against water penetration, freezing water, dust, insects, and so on. Our Infinet units are IP66, IP67 compliant, offering superior protection against water and dust. The IP rating is obtained based on specific tests that must be performed according to the international standard EN 60529. Let's first learn a bit about the notations, and then we will describe some of the tests that must be performed for obtaining the certification. So the first digit describes the degree of protection against the penetration of solid objects, while the second digit describes the degree of moisture protection. For our units, the IP6667 rating signifies that, as you can notice, that we have dust protection according to the first 6 digit, together with resistance to strong water jets, the second 6, and resistance to immersion according to the second 7. There are also additional letters that can accompany the rating, specifying different conditions like high voltage devices, tests performed while moving, and so on. Let's now see what construction features are implemented in the Infinet devices in order to meet the desired requirements. First, we use a robust aluminum enclosure attached to a seal. And for an effective overall sealing, cable glands and stubs are used for the cable connectors and for the empty ports. Also, please note that the pressure equalization system in the Infinet devices involves the gas exchange through the cable entry and the Ethernet cable sheath, with a dry room in which the power supply is installed. In order to avoid the failure of the external unit due to the ingress of moisture into the device at a pressure drop during rain, for example, the cable assembly requirements must be rigorously met and no cracks should be present in the Ethernet cable sheath. In addition, it is necessary to avoid the bending of the Ethernet cable near the external unit, as a result of which the pressure equalization system between the internal volume of the sealed unit and the external environment may be disrupted in the event of a sudden air temperature change. Let's move forward, as I now want to present to you how exactly were the units tested and what are the requirements of the standard. In the picture, you can see an ongoing test using a millimeter probe as part of the dust protection test program. The probe checks the entire enclosure's surface and the joints in great detail. For the second part of the dust testing program, the devices are kept in a chamber with talcum dust. 2 kilograms per cubic meter of dust are maintained in a suspended state for 8 hours, according to the standard requirements. The Russian GOST 14254 standard also considered tests with conducting the abrasive dust. The number 6 rating against dust means that the enclosure offers full protection with no ingress of dust into the equipment. Next, for the second type of tests, we have obtained the 6 and 7 ratings, meaning that the units feature protection against powerful water jets and in case of immersion. In this picture, you can see how water is being projected in powerful jets towards the device. The test is performed from any direction with a duration of no less than 3 minutes every time. And the result is that no harmful effect is observed in case of the tested device. The 7 rating refers to the protection in case of short-term immersion. The devices were immersed into a water tank at a depth of 1 meter and kept for 30 minutes. As a result, no damage was provoked to the equipment. Let's now discuss about another very important climatic aspect, the influence of the temperature onto the functioning of the equipment. The operating temperature greatly impacts the overall functioning. It has impact on the output power of the device, on the performance of the processor, and it also affects the Ethernet circuits. Additionally, the temperature changes the current consumption, but this is something that the developers need to keep in mind, otherwise it will affect the user experience. For this purpose, our units are designed to operate properly in a vast temperature range between -55 and +60 degrees for the models having the index T. The solutions offered by Infinet to address the effects of the operating temperature are the following. First of all, Infinet uses electrical components having the proper temperature grade according to its functionality. For example, the commercial grade ensures the operation of the components between 0 and 70 degrees Celsius, while the industrial grade features a temperature range between -40 and +85 degrees. Aside from choosing the proper electrical components, Infinet uses heaters inside the models designed to operate in extreme cold conditions. Tests were performed in accredited laboratories. The volume and subjects for the test generally depending on the operating frequency range. What can be noticed is that most of the time there is a drift of power and of center frequency at extreme temperatures. Additionally, the shape of the spectrum and the batch performance of the radio subsystem can also be tested. Generally, our own tests in R&D are more focused on the user experience and also check the performance on Ethernet in various temperature ranges. The results have shown that the devices offer a sustainable quality over the operating temperature range without impacting the user experience. Moving forward, the Infinet units are reliable when working in an unfriendly environment. Unfriendly environments are, for example, seacoasts with the salty water vapors in the air or a query parameter. Working in aggressive environments has a direct effect on the lifetime of the device, so special measures must be taken in order to prevent the deterioration of the device over time. Infinet applies the following measures to protect against the aggressive environmental factors. The devices come with an aluminum alloy housing, which is less susceptible to oxidation. Next, the anodizing process is used in order to increase the thickness of the oxide layer on the surface of the enclosure. This offers increased resistance to corrosion. Powder coating is further used for coating the aluminum enclosure as an alternative to the conventional paint. During this process, a dry powder is applied electrostatically and then cured under heat or UV light in order to offer a tougher outlayer design for the device. Tests were carried out for compliance with the Ghost Russian standard. The device is kept in a salt mist chamber using a salt sea solution at a temperature of 35 degrees for 96 hours. The Infinet units have proven both in laboratory testing and in the field over the years a robust and long-lasting functionality in the harshest environments, being backed up by the solid, high-quality hardware design. Our next focus concerns the reliability of the units when it comes to physical impact. The mechanical effects are diverse, from shocks to stretching, compression, rotation, vibration, and so on. In particular, we are going to discuss about shocks and vibrations. These factors are very important and must be considered when designing the equipment because bumps and vibrations will always occur in mobile scenarios, for example. When the devices are attached to moving vehicles, on ships, or when operating in an unstable environment, there will always be a mechanical stress acting on the device that will impact the stability of its operation. In order to ensure reliability under mechanical loads, Infinet models the impacts of these loads on the enclosure and on the fasteners to discover any weaknesses and to make sure that everything is taken into account. Additionally, the heat distribution is simulated in order to make sure that all the vulnerable aspects are reviewed and that a stable operation can be ensured. The tests performed in an accredited laboratory confirmed the mechanical strength of the units. Tests for compliance with the IEC 62368 classes were performed using a 500 grams ball with a diameter of 50 millimeters from a height of 1 meter and from an angle of 60 degrees. Additionally, tests for sinusoidal vibrations were performed in a 200 Hertz range with 22 Hertz increments up and down at an acceleration of 22 meters per second or 2G. The total duration of the test was of 18 hours. As you can see, the units have been carefully tested in many unfavorable conditions in order to make sure that their functionality is not affected. Let's move forward and discuss the electrical effects in installations where there are powerful electric motors or powerful broadcast transmitters nearby. The operation on both the radio interface and on the Ethernet interface are affected. The nature of the electrical effects can be very vast, so different types of disturbances must be taken into account, from the ubiquitous electromagnetic fields to short, powerful pulses to conductive interference generated through direct contact. I am going now to briefly review some of the implemented measures in order to address the effects of the external electrical interference. First, TVS diodes are used, which are specifically designed for protecting the circuit board electronics against the induced voltage spikes. Next, isolation gaps are present between the primary high voltage circuits and the rest of the board. Shielded cables and connectors are used in order to offer protection against the electromagnetic influences. And the last, grounding is implemented in order to protect against the power surges. We will detail the grounding connections for our units towards the end of the presentation, so I will not discuss it further at this point. Tests were performed in an accredited laboratory for different types of interference. The ETSI EN 301489 standard describes the technical specifications for each test and what should be the proper performance response of the device. I will just briefly present to you a couple of physical setups used for the tests. In the first picture, you can see the setup for testing the immunity of the Ethernet connection to the conductive interference. An external interfering circuit is directly connected to the Ethernet cable connection used by the Infinet unit. The important thing to mention is that the Infinet unit is functional according to the standard requirements under such direct connected sources of interference. Next, you can see the setup for immunity testing against induced interference. This time, the source is an external radio communication device. The units were tested to see if they can operate under such conditions, and the results were always positive. Another important test is against the electrostatic discharge through air. Often there are situations when charge is accumulated on a different object, and if the difference in potential with respect to the Infinet unit becomes high enough, a rapid discharge will take place in order to re-establish the equilibrium of charge. The test is performed with an ESD generator directed and moving towards the Infinet unit until the discharge will take place. This simulates a real-life situation of discharge through air. Please also note that there are external factors that will facilitate the occurrence of an electrostatic discharge. For example, a low humidity and a low temperature increase the probability of discharges. The last test that I will show you is the surge test for the Ethernet interface. A high voltage is applied on the Ethernet cable between the power supply unit and the Ethernet interface of a Quanta 70 unit, for example. The tests have shown that the Ethernet interface is not damaged up to a certain high voltage being directly applied to it. As a conclusion, I want to emphasize the fact that our units have been rigorously tested against many types of external interfering factors and have proved to be robust and compliant with the standards. Let's now see what happens when using an improper power supply. In this case, the unintended induced high voltages can break through the voltage suppressors that are meant to protect the electrical circuits, leading to the damage of the diode bridges. In the first scenario, if the PN junction of the diode melts and turns into a conductor, the power supply will be in emergency mode with the indicator flashing and the radio unit is switched off. In the second scenario, if the PN junction burns and breaks the power supply circuit, the power supply will be on with the indicator lights on and the radio unit will be switched off. Therefore, it is very important to provide a proper power supply to the units, otherwise damages will occur and the units will not be functional. Now it is time to talk a bit about grounding and its importance. Grounding generally refers to implementing a low resistance conduction circuit between the installed equipment and the ground surface. In case of lighting, very high voltages are applied to the communication system, and without a proper grounding, the current has nowhere to dissipate and it will damage the equipment. In the picture, you can see a typical connection scheme with grounding connections represented in green. What I want to mention is that the shielded FTP connector should be connected to the power supply unit or IDU in our picture. And a very important aspect is that all the devices must use separate grounding cables that should be connected to the grounded circuit and not to the mast. The best scenario is when the grounding cables are aligned in parallel with the Ethernet cable. Also, the pole should be properly grounded by connecting it to the building's grounding circuit according to your local regulations. These are the general guidelines, but for more details, you can consult our technical documentation. The presentation that you will receive will also include a link to our documentation. This concludes our webinar for today. I hope you now have a quite clear picture about the robustness and reliability of the Infinet units. And now if you have any questions, please feel free to write them down in the chat section and I will answer them one by one. In the meantime, we'll just have a short break. Thank you very much. I see we have two questions. The first question is how can the units be powered up safely? For this question, we have many types of power sources that can be applied to our units. And we have created the documents and a webinar that describes all the procedures and all the power supply sources that can be used with our units and if they are safe or not. I'm going to now provide you a link to you in the chat section so you can check the documentation. And the second question that we have is if we have a dedicated unit for providing GPS positioning for our radio units. Yes, we have a dedicated unit for the R5000 series and for the Evolution series. It's called the aux-Odoo Sync. And for the other devices, for Quanta 5 and for XG, for example, the synchronization device is included in the unit. You just have to provide a GPS antenna, okay? So you do not need an external synchronization hub, you just need a GPS antenna to connect it to the unit. So depending on what device you need in your network, you either have to use an external synchronization hub or just provide an additional GPS antenna. We are asked further if the independent GPS units available for purchase and subsequent use from Infinet. Yes, they are available for purchase. You can buy the synchronization hub. You can also buy GPS antennas from us. Okay, they are auxiliary devices. On our website, there is a special section for auxiliary devices. Thank you once again for your time, and I hope to see you again during our next webinar. Have a nice day, everybody.